Hello, everyone. I'd like to introduce you all to Miss Sia Knight. She is someone that I've had a great opportunity to know for a while, and we actually went to James Madison University together, and we had a chance to do a lot with events and programming, and we've stayed in touch for all of these years. So those relationships that you all are making in college definitely can last a lifetime. And so when I was sharing with her about what my colleague, Brittany Hollis, who is the IET career coach here at Nova Systemic, and were doing, she jumped right in and said she could offer something on podcasting and how people can really elevate their brand, really set themselves apart, especially in these uncertain times. And so we're very excited to have Sia Knight talking about elevating your brand through podcasting. And Sia, I will stop sharing and I will turn the screen over to you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you so much, Tiffany. So I want to, oh, look at that. And I love your screensaver, Tiffany. Go Dukes. So as Tiffany mentioned before, we go way back. And I am so grateful that she is allowing me to kind of talk with you all today and just share a little bit about my story, how I'm using podcasting, and to come up with some ideas and suggestions on how you could potentially use podcasting to elevate your personal brand. Because how many of you all know for sure, whether you're working on it or not, you have a personal brand. And when I talk about a brand, I don't mean just what you use to get Instagram deals, or I'm talking about what people think, know, and feel about you when you come to mind. That's your personal brand. So let's see if we can kind of shape that in a way that helps to make, to help you along the way. So I'm going to share my presentation. Let me get here. All right, let's go F5. We used to do back in the day. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Oops. Or not. Righty. Present. There must be something with Zoom and the presentations that's not allowing me to be great. However, I rebuke it. We are going to get this squared away. F5.
Sia, will it work for you? I was going to say at the bottom. Awesome.
I got it. That's good. All right. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Elevating your personal brand through podcasting by Sia Knight. And I'm hosting a current podcast called Lessons in Savvy Living. So I'll talk a little bit about myself, how I use podcasting, some ideas on how you can use podcasting as well. So the guiding question for this session is, how can producing a podcast be a unique yet effective branding and job searching tool? Because many of you all are in college, you're seeking more information, you're seeking an education, not only for knowledge's sake, but you also are looking for additional opportunities. So that's what I want to kind of focus on today. How can you use podcasting in order to kind of distinguish yourself and to make sure that you have as many opportunities as you are able to take advantage of? So today I plan to speak for about 20-25 minutes or so, and then I want to answer any questions that you all have. So I know Tiffany and Brittany are on, they're monitoring the chat. And so if at the end there are any questions, I'll be happy to attempt to answer them as well. If not, if there's something that I'm not quite sure of, I will make sure that I get back to Tiffany and Brittany so that we can kind of close the loop so that you can get the information that you desire on this topic. Okay, so let me introduce myself. My name is Sia Knight, as I mentioned before, and the first thing I should say is that I'm an educator. That means I have been working in some public school for about 25 years, which is hard to even say or believe, especially since I look like I'm 30. That's true. I got it. But so I've been working in the schools for about 25 years. I've been a teacher, school counselor. I've been an assistant principal, administrator. I've done lots of different things in the school system. So I share that to say podcasting isn't just for people who want to do it full time. Okay, so I'll put that out there. Second thing I want to say is I'm a mom, so I will accept all your thoughts and prayers when it comes to helping me move along. I've got two teenagers and I am a seeker. Now, what does that mean? That means I'm the person that you see on social media and various outlets, and people are saying, what is she up to now? What is she doing? What's this new project? That's me. I'm that type of person who's always trying to figure out what's next. So for me, what's next, actually, or what's now, is my podcast called Lessons in Savvy Living. And you see like the little logo here. Let's talk a little bit about podcast. What is a podcast? So let's take it back, because I don't want to assume that everyone knows kind of what a podcast is. It's fairly new within the last 10 to 15 years that we've started using this vernacular. And it has been within the last 5 years that podcasting, I would say, has become mainstream. And let's go a step further. It's been during this pandemic that we find ourselves in. At the time that we're taping this, we're going through the COVID-19 crisis, and a lot of people have discovered podcasts during this time. So what's the definition? The definition: a podcast is a digital audio file made available on the internet for downloading to a computer, mobile device. Typically, it's a series, new installments of which can be received by subscribers automatically, right? So what is a podcast? It's usually not a one-time thing. It's by definition audio, but one thing I will say is that what I do with my podcast, and what a lot of people like to do as well, is they like to have a video component to it as well. And we can talk a little bit about that, or if anyone has questions about that, I'd be happy to answer. So let's kind of have this common grounding in terms of what a podcast is. So it is something, the really popular podcast outlets are the Apple Podcast app. So it used to be on iTunes, but now if you have an iPhone or a iPad, it's actually a purple app that says podcast. So there are other types of ways to get podcasts as well. So there's something called Stitcher for us, our Android users. There is Spotify, which is also very popular. iHeartRadio has a component in which you can podcast. So podcasts are all over the place. And in fact, you can also have a podcast that goes out on what's called an RSS feed. So, and I don't want to get too deep into the weeds and into the technical stuff, but what I do is I upload my podcast on my website, and then it feeds to all of those different places. I'll leave it there. I don't want to get too geeky or too nerdy. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my podcast story because, okay, I've shared with you a little bit. I'm a little bit of a seeker, a little bit of a dreamer. I'm always doing something. And podcast, I've added that to my resume as far back as, I want to say 2013 is when my first podcast, The College Savvy Coach, debuted. I think I actually called it College Savvy Radio, but it was just to kind of distinguish the business from the podcast itself. Now, I was a college admissions coach. I used to help students and families determine kind of what they need in order to get ready for college. So as the college savvy coach, I had a lot of information to give. So what I decided, one of the avenues I wanted to do that was through a podcast. So the College Savvy Coach or College Savvy Radio was a content, I don't want to say dump, but that's the word that I thought it probably best fits. It's a vehicle. Let's put it that way. That sounds a lot nicer. In which I had a lot of information. I wanted to give it out to people. That's how I did it. I did it through the podcast. That's one of the vehicles. I had also a website. I also had a YouTube channel. So that's for those of you all who are thinking kind of big picture. Podcasting can be one of many ways in which you can get your message out. So that was several years ago. So I podcasted, I enjoyed it. I had several episodes. And then I decided, this is a lot of work to produce these episodes. And it was a lot of work. I would do things a little bit differently now if I were doing that show now. But what I've done is I've taken my information and the knowledge that I gained from doing that show, and I've turned it to my current project, which is called Lessons in Savvy Living. So Lessons in Savvy Living, one difference between the two shows is that Lessons in Savvy Living is guest focused. So every episode I have a guest that I interview about a particular topic. And I say that's less education and more inspiration. So you do learn things from this podcast, but it's not just on me to come up with the topic and to talk about it and to be a talking head each and every episode, which I do it weekly. So each and every week, it's not just me thinking, whoo, what in the world am I going to talk about now? So I would say, before I kind of tackle the next slide, I would say that for those of you all, if you're using this as a tool in order to get a job or to create more visibility for yourself, I would say consider doing a guest focused podcast, because that will do several things for you. Number one, if you have a topic that you're interested in, and I'll talk a little bit about that, and you are, let's say you are in the technology field and you are a techno geek. That is your moniker. That's who you are. So you're interested in the topic and you're going to be looking for a job soon in that area. One thing you may want to do is invite guests on the podcast to talk about related subjects. So you might interview some people who are actually networking gold. You might interview people who are potential employers. So that's one thing, that's one way to look at it as well. So my suggestion is, if you're looking to do this as a networking tool, as a way to elevate your brand and to stand out above the competition, think about having a guest focused podcast. So is podcasting right for you? Here are some questions I want you to consider, because podcasting is not something that I would say, oh my goodness, everybody needs to do it. Everybody, come on, get on this podcast train. You must do that. I'm not going to say that, because it's not for everyone. But there are a couple of suggestions a couple of questions I would say to ask yourself. And I could add some more to the list as well. So first question is, do you have a subject that you're passionate about? So if there is something that you are a little humdrum about, you don't really care about it that much, and you're not really thinking that it's something that you're going to want to keep up with, don't choose that. Don't choose that. You have to choose something that it's going to maintain your interest when it comes to actually recording the podcast. You have to produce the episodes. You're going to also have to make sure that you continue the momentum in terms of getting guests if you decide to go that way. So it has to be something that you really, really enjoy or are passionate about. So another question, if you're, should I do a podcast? Should I not? The question is, are you looking for more visibility? Do you need more eyes on you as a person? Are you, as the third question says, are you trying to distinguish yourself from the competition? Are you in a job search? Are you trying to kind of become a subject matter expert? Then a podcast could be the right move for you. Now, here's a thing that some people might say. They might say, Sia, I'm super shy and I don't like to talk. I don't like to talk in front of audiences. I don't like to talk to other people. I would say then maybe a different method would be best for you, because the nature of podcasting is that you are talking, you are communicating thoughts, feelings, and ideas through this platform. So we'll uh we'll leave it there. Now, there might be a distinction for you, those of you all who are a little bit on the shy side. You may say, hey, I don't mind an audio podcast, but the video, no way, am I interested in that. And that's fine. So you have to figure out or determine what's best for you. All right. Now, look at me. It's almost as if I had come up with this PowerPoint myself. What kind of podcast is right for you? So you've determined, okay, I am going to do a podcast. I want to put myself out there. What type of podcast is right for you? It can be an informative podcast. You could be giving information about a subject, a topic. Uh, it could be a how-to podcast. Those are very, very popular because people nowadays, research consists of going online and finding out what you want to know, right? So a how-to podcast could be a right type of podcast for you. A guest centered podcast. Again, that's what I would recommend. Is if you are doing this for networking purposes, if you want to do this in order to kind of stand out, if you want to do this as a marketing slash networking tool, perhaps think about inviting guests on your podcast, and think about what types of guests. So do you want to invite people? Well, let me take a step back. Think about the audience you're trying to reach. Are you trying to reach people who are just like you, who have the same questions as you? Because that will inform what type of guest you may want to explore or have on your show. So I'll give you an example. On my podcast, Lessons in Savvy Living, I invite women, and I say just regular women, real stories, real lessons. So that is really kind of the audience that I'm going after. Those are because I love stories. I love, my favorite type of movie or documentary is biography. I like to know about people's lives. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to share that. So you have to think about what your goal is, what your objective is when you're planning this all out. And the last type of podcast that I'll talk a little bit about is reviewing the material of others. Some people make a whole podcast out of reading a variety of different books and articles and giving their information, giving their take on it. And that is definitely a way to go, as long as you are giving the original authors the correct credit, the correct that you're making sure that you're making it clear what ideas are yours and what ideas you are responding to. Right. So you said, all right, this is sounding pretty good. Now what? What now? What's next? the first tip, and I have 3 of them, on elevating your brand, your personal brand through podcasting is be intentional. I want you to think this thing through. I want you to figure out what is your goal, what is the objective. If your goal is to get a job in the field of education, let's say that's your goal, then everything you do and the way you set up your podcast and the way you arrange the platform should lead back to that. So it's one thing to kind of say, jump into it, feel it out, and that's fine. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about you doing this and providing this type of podcast for a reason. So I want you to keep that reason, keep that information top of mind. So be intentional. Next, be resourceful. Make sure you use all of the resources that are available to you. Let me say, for instance, um, I'm not going to tell you exactly start to finish on how to set up a podcast, but you know who can tell you? YouTube. Someone on YouTube has come up with, and I looked it up last night. I wanted to make sure before I made this statement that there are people out there who can teach you how to do this. I want you to make sure that you are using all of the resources in your circle, in your community, so that you can have the best product possible. Otherwise, I mean, it's okay if you want to do it for kicks, if you want to do it for fun, but again, that's not what this particular topic is addressing. If you are trying to use a podcast in order to elevate your brand, I want you to make sure you're using all of the resources. When it comes to, if you decide you want to have a podcast that has several guests, make sure you're going to the right places in order to find these guests. So I'll give you an example. For my podcast, I wanted to talk to women who have gone through adversity and come out on the other side. So what I did was I posted on Facebook. I said, hey, here's my show. Here's the goal of my show. Here's the objective. Here are the topics. I'm interested in having guests. So I ended up with over 100 women responding, wanting to be guests on my podcast, because I was very clear about what I wanted and what I was going to ask of them. So, I mean, I had more women than I had weeks in the year, because I had planned to have an episode every week, but I was flooded with requests. So make sure that you're using your resources. Make sure that you are looking around and not just kind of stumbling through getting this podcast off the ground. Because what we do often is we stay stuck because it's an excuse to not move forward. Okay, did you hear that? Sometimes we say, well, I don't know how to do this. I don't know where to go. I don't know who to ask. Make sure that you are using the resources that are available in order to get this project off the ground. And the last tip on elevating your brand through podcasting is to be authentic. People don't want to log in and see a bunch of fake. They really and truly don't. So when you're podcasting, I'm not saying that you should be kind of I'm not saying that you can't be polished. I'm not saying that you can't be very kind of clear in your speaking. But what I strive for, and I would encourage you to strive for, is to be conversational in whatever your topic is, and to be yourself. Because at the end of the day, for this purpose, what you're trying to do is you're trying to kind of promote yourself and introduce people to who you are. And a good example of this is Tabitha Brown. Now, some of you all may be familiar with who she is, but I was just watching one of her videos today just because she's everywhere now. She is a vegan cook. She says she's not even a chef. She says she has the only thing she did was she came to Hollywood. She wanted to become an actress. She had a health scare, found that eating a vegan diet helped her, and she started to document it. That's it. And now what has happened is through, and she doesn't have just podcasting, but she has, she's on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and TikTok. That's where she took off. The point is, she could not believe the fact that she's having so much success by being herself. Authenticity is so big, and it's such a huge part of doing, of what people are looking for and yearning for in today's society. So at this point, I want to answer any questions that you all may have about podcasting and about, I'll just say about podcasting. And what I will do is I had a couple of questions that were given to me in advance, and I'll go ahead and I will, it looks like there's a chat. Tabitha Brown. Yes, I love Tabitha Brown too, right? She's very real. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to answer the questions that I see that were given to me in advance. And if there are any additional questions, I will address them from the chat and ask Tiffany and Brittany to kind of keep me up to date. And then we'll go from there. How's that? All right. Okay, so I put this box up and it messed up my ability to advance my slide. Okay, so here's a question. How can you document a podcast on a resume? So if you are doing this in order to make sure that you can elevate your brand, you want to stand out, you want to make sure that the people, the eyes who are looking to hire people and looking to give opportunities, in order to do that, what you can do is you can start this podcast, but how do you document it on a resume? And then why would people care that you've started a podcast? The answer that I would say is that you want to emphasize the skills involved. You want to let people know kind of how much work goes into producing. So as a podcaster, you're a producer, you're a content creator, you are a social media manager. You've done lots of different things, and what it will do, it will emphasize first and foremost communication, because almost every field you go into, people want to make sure that you are able to communicate. So that's one thing that you want to make sure that you're emphasizing. So emphasize the skills involved. Because if someone who's my age or older and they find out, oh, you've been a podcaster, that's fine, and you put that on your resume, but what does that mean? Some people aren't as tech savvy as those who I know who are on this particular presentation. Another question was, should I run ads during my podcast or not? It depends. And that is strictly going back to the question, what's your purpose? If your purpose is to inform, if your purpose is to kind of highlight yourself, if your purpose is to kind of have yourself as a brand and you want to elevate yourself, then maybe ads aren't the right thing. If you're going to use a podcast as partial income, then perhaps ads would make a difference. And some people would say you can do ads, and the question becomes, are you a sellout, to use that terminology? It just depends. If you are a person and you are if you're working in education or your desire is to have a career in education, perhaps an ad for a little blue pill may not go with the type of branding that you're seeking. So you have to make sure if you do run ads, it's congruent with your audience and your desired audience as well. The next question, what are the potential career paths associated with podcasting? So as I mentioned, you can just have a podcast and be a podcaster, which is fine. You can also, if you say, you know what, being behind the microphone, being behind the camera, that's really not what I'm really interested in. So perhaps something else would be interesting, but I do like podcasts. You can be a podcast producer. So many of us who are podcasters, we produce our own episodes. It's cost efficient. We like that. But many people, once they get to a certain level, would be happy to pay someone to quote unquote produce their podcast. And what do I mean when I say that? I mean, after I tape my interview with a person, okay, it uploads into the computer. I leave, and actually I trained my son who's 15 to produce my podcast episodes. So there's another tip. If you have a teenager or if you know someone who's really tech savvy, they can do it probably a lot quicker than you can. So he can get a job very easily as a podcast producer. He learned all of the things that go into producing an episode. Also, another career path or job that's associated with podcasting would be just social media manager. There are some people who kind of run the whole gamut, and they will produce episodes, they will post content, they will suggest content. In some cases, they write content for you. They just take a look at your brand, your messaging, and they said, oh, okay. And what they attempt to do is they attempt to write content in your voice. So if you're interested in podcasting or social media, those are some different areas or some certain career paths that you can possibly take. All right, and that is the last question that I had in advance. So I'm going to open up the floor to see if anyone happens to have any particular questions, or also for Tiffany, if you have questions that you've thought of that you think that would be very great for the audience, please
So,
let me know.
yes. So, do you think that there is any category, maybe in particular, that is kind of over podcasted? I don't know if that's a word, but
I see. Oh, that is actually a great question, which I knew you would bring all the great questions, Tiffany, so no problem. So a lot of people say, well, I missed the podcasting boat. If I'd started 5 years ago or 10 years ago, I would have 1 million followers or 1 million listeners. And so now it's too late for me to start. Here's what I would say. I would say that you and your voice is missing from the conversation, right? So if there is a topic that a lot of people are podcasting about, like for instance, true crime is a podcast, is a popular category now, or entertainment, or gossip, that's a particular topic. Whatever topic you like and you want to pursue, if you bring your voice to it, then it's not oversaturated. So there may be 100 podcasts on beauty secrets or how to look younger, okay? But your voice isn't there. So there are a lot of different podcasts. There are thousands and thousands and thousands of podcasts. I'll put that out there, and I absolutely kind of concede that. But don't let that stop you, especially if the main goal is for you to gain and maintain visibility.
another question that we have is related to how many people are too many people on a podcast?
So do you mean as guest, as
Yes.
panelist?
How about both as guest and then when you have maybe two co-hosts and then you have multiple guests, how do you really manage that process? And does everyone need to be in the same place, especially now with social distancing? We can't really all be in the same place per se.
Right. So that's a good question. So the answer is um, when you have, I think Zoom has helped us all in this particular situation. And in fact, that's the platform that I use for my podcast. So Zoom will, number one, it won't let more than one person really and truly talk at a time. So you can be different places. If we're at 10 different people, we can be in 10 different places and we can all kind of have a conversation virtually. But I would say that one thing that I would be careful about is that if you have too many people and too many voices, if people can't distinguish who's speaking, that becomes confusing, it becomes frustrating, and people just I hung up like it was 1985. They will just unplug. They'll unplug and they won't listen. So I would say a couple of co-hosts, that's fine. It may take a little bit to get your rhythm, and it may take a little bit to kind of get the flow of, so you're not talking over each other. So that's great for a couple of co-hosts. And I've seen it effective to have at least a couple of different guests. But you just don't want too many voices because it can be hard to distinguish. Um, but according to technology, you can have dozens of people, but it's probably not the most effective and efficient way to get your message across.
Awesome. So I have a question of how many, have you seen many student-centered podcasts in your experiences? And if so, what have they looked like?
So I guess my question, and Tiffany, you can help me maybe clarify, student-centered in terms of college student-centered, or I wonder if that's okay.
Yes.
Well, yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So I have not personally seen a lot of college student-centered podcasts. I've seen a few. I haven't seen a lot. But here's the thing. It doesn't mean it's not out there because I'm not the target audience who would be looking for a podcast that is college student centered. So the question is it a podcast in which the college students are talking to other college students? If so, the messaging, the branding, and everything you go and everything you do, it will go to the people who you want to find you. And that's a very important and subtle point as well. So when I used to podcast and I would talk about college admission, my target audience, even though I was talking about the kids getting into college, the students getting into high school students, my audience were parents because I had that perspective as a parent. Here's how you help your child. So some people will say, well, I want everyone to listen to me, but your message isn't for everyone. And people will get lost and you'll get discouraged because the people who you want to hear your message and people who are your message is targeted to, if you're not speaking directly to them, you're going to get lost. You're going to get lost.
And see, I don't remember if you covered this in the beginning about the cost associated with podcasting. I mean, is it affordable? I mean, I know affordable is relative to
Mhm.
how much is in your bank account.
Absolutely. Yes. So, no, I haven't gone over this, but podcasting, you can start a podcast for a minimal investment. I'll put it that way. So, for instance, one thing that I love is I love these headphones. I've had them for years, maybe about 8 to 10 years. I know I look like the Time Life operator for those of you all who are old enough to remember that. Um, but I it's a good quality microphone. So what do you need to start a podcast? You need a quality microphone, and you need a way to get to record the podcast and a way to distribute the podcast. So if these headphones are $30, you can, I know some people who don't even use headphones. They use their iPhone, they use their computer, their Mac, their PC. You can do that. Now, I'm kind of a audio snob because I like good audio. So if you want to invest, it's not going to be thousands and thousands of dollars. For the video portion, I also record on Zoom as well. So I have I have a ring light that's behind the camera. So it looks a little bit better. But these are all things that you can add later on. You can start with your phone and you can record a podcast starting that way. So that's the true answer. You can start with what you already have in your pocket.
Would you recommend if someone, so let's say that they, do a podcast and maybe their views on a topic have changed, right? Maybe they were vegan, now they're not a vegan. So they may not want to have podcasts out there anymore talking about them being a vegan when they're not a vegan anymore. Can you remove everything from the internet?
Oh, that's funny, Tiffany. That's a trick question.
Yes.
Can you take episodes down that you've put up? Yes, you can. Can you erase it from the internet? No. Just assume that everything that you've ever put on the internet, including for me, this presentation will go out in some way. I will assume anytime that there's a camera or a microphone recording that it is going to be out in the atmosphere forever. So it's one thing if you say, I had certain views, because that's part of that authenticity, right? And that's part of the evolution. Like, I used to be a vegan, but then I decided, man, I'm hungry. And then I decided to do something else. I'm just kidding, vegans. So that's something else. But if you are spewing information or views or viewpoints that will not help you get a job, in fact, will get you fired, then just know and assume that anything you put out into the interwebs will be there always and forever.
And one last question, unless we have some more that come through the chat. With YouTube, when you post or when you publish videos, there's a question that asks public, private, is this appropriate for kids? Is that the same? Are there the same types of guidelines related to podcasting, or does it depend on the platform that you're using as to those types of security questions, or who is this content safe for?
So that is a good question. So when it comes to podcasting, they do want to know kind of what category, how you would categorize. And I know some outlets say, is this safe for work? And, NSFW, not safe for work. And they will brand it as such. But I would say that it's important to kind of think long term about this, because if you mentioned YouTube, with YouTube, if you say that your content is for kids, I know it gets flagged a certain way, and then it determines whether you can have ads, whether or not people can watch it later on. So the same thing when it comes to podcasts. You can make a determination, but be careful and think long term whether or not you say, oh my goodness, my content it's not safe for work. And then later on, you want to say, well, I want to have, now it's going to be family friendly. There may not be a way for you to reverse that. It depends on the different outlets. So Apple might kind of have you set in a certain kind of have you set a certain way, and then you can't change it later on, and then you have to go and start a whole new podcast and build another audience. So that can be a tough thing to have to talk about.
Okay.
Okay.
Excellent. Well, Sia, we just want to say thank you so much for joining us this afternoon and sharing with us these really great tips and amazing tips. I know myself personally, I've tried to do a little podcasting here and there, but I'm one of those people who start it and then I'm like, oh, well, I don't have time, or who's my audience, or I just get overwhelmed. And so I think the way that you presented everything really can help people think about what direction they want to go in and actually go through the process and have a podcast series going on because they've taken into account who is my audience, what am I trying to focus on, what is the voice that I want to put out there. So I think for you to put it in terms that make it so much more manageable to think about starting a podcast, I think for our students and obviously other individuals who will get to see this video once it's posted, I think it will be something that can really be a great tool right now. And as we all know, there are so many things that people can do. Some are doing and some are not, but there are a lot of things that people need to do to set themselves apart. As you mentioned, the jobs are a little bit more different. They're wanting to know what have you been doing during the past 3 or 4 months during this global pandemic? What new skill sets have you picked up? I think it would be amazing if there was more student-centered podcasts that we were aware of. I think the work that Brittany and I are doing with our NOVA students and our K through 12 population that are often invited to our different activities and then other activities through the systemic outreach from NOVA, we're all really trying to help students and people gain new information, have new skill sets, be able to really set themselves apart. Because in the end, when they're applying for that job or they're applying for college or just applying for anything, we want them to feel like they have these great tools and ideas and resources. And Brittany and I recently had a chance to be on a podcast a week ago related to career and technical education. And it was actually two of us. We were both involved and we were in different places doing this podcast. And the podcast owner, I guess you could say, it was in, I think, Arizona or California on the other side of the, yeah. And so it was really a neat experience, but it was such a great experience in us talking about making events virtual and the students that have been participating in our sessions that we actually are going to be working with some of our NOVA students to incorporate them in a podcast. So you never know where these opportunities can lead when you show up. And so several of our students from NOVA have been showing up week after week on these different sessions, and we just want to find ways to help them out. And so I like how you started out with talking about the networking part of the connections related to podcasting. And I think this is something that will be really helpful for everyone.
Great. Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I had a great time, ladies.
Wonderful. And so I'm just going to close out with our last screen here and share a little bit of information with everyone.